So I have the honor of introducing our speaker today, Marissa Alexa McCool. She is a scathing atheist who has numerous accomplishments to her name. A successful podcaster, including The Inciting Incident, The Fists Are Getting Out of Hand, and Doubting Dogma, which you can find through the podcast players of your choice. She's also a successful writer with amazing works like The PC Lie, How Voters Decided I Don't Matter, False Start, Passing Cars, The Internal Monologue of a Neurodivergent Trans Girls, and more, which, as Heather has mentioned, are for sale in the back, and you can get them signed today, so that's kind of awesome. She's also a highly active activist, working with many to help those in the LGBTQ community, specifically with one of her latest projects, the Trans Podcast Visibility Initiative. So, with all of this, and I know I'm missing a lot, please join me in welcoming Marissa Alexa McCool.
Okay, I turned this thing on. Can you hear me okay? Oh, yeah. Cool. So, forgive me, this is a little awkward for me. I normally improvise everything I do because I have so much shit to do that I don't have time to write it all, except the stuff I put in my books. So, thank you for having me, Minnesota Atheists, and thank you for being here to, as the Facebook event said, listen to Marissa McCool. Maybe it's because as an autistic person, I tend to interpret things a little differently than they're intended, but when that invite showed up in my notifications, it sounded like, hey, you listen to Marissa McCool, or else. If only I could get my kids to interpret that. It's weird for some people to understand. I'm a very shy introvert most of the time, and I love to be on stage. It doesn't seem to make sense. I will go on any show. I tell some of my friends, I don't care if you're the only one who listens to your podcast, I will show up and bullshit with you for a couple of hours. But I can stand up here and speak, but later, if we all hang out at Oceanography or whatever it was called, I'll be sitting there going, why are you talking to me? Hertzie can vouch for this. I was at a God Awful Movies live show, and people were coming up to me and saying, were you on God Awful Movies? I'm like, you know they're here, right? Why are you talking to the weird chick? Okay. So, therefore, while some of you have attended this event because you know who I am, which is why it's excessively gayer than usual, I'm sure, at least some of you do not. I am Marissa Alexa McCool, and I am foremost a writer. Last year, I made my first public appearance at the 17th production of the University of Pennsylvania's Vagina Monologues, which was also the first production in 17 years of the show to include a trans person. I was a senior, and I knew the director. I was not cast, but I was told there was a vacancy, and I had recently come out, and the director, my friend Pearl Lowe, said, do you want to be on stage and talk about vaginas? And yeah, that sounds good to me. But before I knew about the process of the show, as well as Eve Ensler being a bit of a stickler when it comes to original material during her show, I wrote my own piece explaining who I was and how I got to that moment. That monologue I ended up performing in the back with all 70-ish women who were performing in that show. There's a little circle called the safe space. And during that time, it's about an hour before the show, any woman who has something to say, and it's usually pretty intimate and not always pleasant, can say those things. And that was the first place I read it. But because there's such licensing issues with Eve Ensler's work, I was not able to read it that time. However, I was in a different production at the Carlisle YMCA in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and I read it in the back the same way I did back then, and the director said, I'm throwing that out, you're reading that. So I got the opportunity to read that monologue in the town I grew up in, and it was probably the coolest moment of my life because afterward I got a standing ovation from the entire cast and the entire audience, which was well over 300 people. And that was a bit outdated, unfortunately, because that monologue involved a lot of, this is who I am, deal with it. And as you can tell, I'm really subtle. I don't like to stand out. I don't like to be bold. I'm wearing the t-shirt of probably the boldest misanthrope I know, No Illusions, who likes to yell fuck a lot at people and then disappear for the other, I don't know, whatever 4 hours of the week he's not podcasting. He has a busier schedule than I do. But one of the major things I'm going to be discussing here today is compartmentalizing our rage, our motivations, our emotions, and our reactions to others, especially when they disagree with us. And as atheists, I know everybody agrees with us all the time, so you'll have to forgive me if a little of this sounds redundant. But I want to help you get to know me a bit first, so it seemed out of place to read last year's monologue. Instead of giving you a resume, which Hertzie was already nice enough to do, about 15% of it anyway, I'm going to read a monologue I wrote to perform this year, which I will in a few weeks at the 18th show of that same Vagina Monologues production at my now alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania. Last year I was a last-minute addition and introduced a monologue. This year I'm an invited spotlight speaker, and I will perform this piece. This piece is called A Year as Myself. When I was 16 years old, a guy named Will told me that I would one day be working for him. Going to community college was going to land me a job with someone like him signing my paychecks. When I was 28 years old, a girl named Amanda, convinced I was a fetish, someone to be used for her own entertainment and pleasure, put her hand around my throat after I said no, after I resisted, after I said I didn't want it, and she choked me until I stopped resisting. It seems like a different lifetime when those words were spoken to a false representation of a person I pretended to be. For that person's name is not the one inscribed on my Penn diploma. I didn't go to graduation because the previous year a certain guy was in attendance about whom I had written a book that started with the words "fuck you." I don't know if anybody knows who that guy is. I think the number 45 is associated with his name. I did attend LGBT graduation, though. I didn't attend the formal graduation because, like I said, he was at the previous one because I had the pleasure of going to the same school he did. But when I listened to a speech that lauded Penn's inclusivity and protections that included gender identity, they loved talking about how they were either the first or second school to include that in their anti-discrimination policy. 10 minutes afterward, I was followed into a bathroom, despite having a friend with me, despite having that friend vouch for me, and I was questioned, humiliated, embarrassed, and ashamed. My friend's word wasn't enough. My word wasn't enough. My name wasn't enough. My ID wasn't enough because someone supposedly saw a guy go in there, and Marissa, she said, could be a gender-neutral name, apparently. 3 months earlier, I'd stood on that stage performing under my true name, my true identity, my true self, with my words published in the program, proclaiming loudly who I am, proudly and assertively, I am Marissa. In this place, on that stage, while shooting video for the football team, backstage before each show, on Locust Walk, on my diploma, in the articles in Daily Pennsylvanian, on my book, my podcasts, on Canvas, on my Penn ID. But after all that, there I stood because a security guard in the cafeteria didn't believe my friend who said who I was. Didn't believe me when I said who I was. And didn't believe the name that was emblazoned on book covers and podcast lists. At that moment, I was only a suspicion. I thought, if that's what it's like for someone known and protected by the institution itself, what must it be like for the trans girl who doesn't have a platform, the friends in the theater, or access to a voice, or the safety to scream in a hate pastor's face? She's the one I think of most, the one who's gone with me in the past year. Had that adamant fuck you come from someone aged 18 and not 31, it cannot be understated the regret that seeps in upon knowing who you truly are and wondering how life could have been. Those 13 years that were spent visibly in the closet could have been spent protecting someone who didn't have a closet to hide in. I spent that year traveling the country, speaking words, but hearing more. In Hickory, North Carolina, a father confessed to me the difficulty he'd gone through in learning what trans meant because his daughter was trans, and the words I had spoken had helped him learn how to love who his daughter was instead of who he thought she was. That was at ReasonCon. I performed a cold open in Allentown, Pennsylvania, fast delivering a poem I'd written and deciding to use that instead of an introduction. I'll be reading that piece later. My words reached people in a way they never could have before I was me, because the real me was the one who had been asked to give them. I told you about this, but I received a standing ovation in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, for a piece I'd written partially published in the program at that show last year. When the director threw out the script, the only people who had heard it prior to that day were the ones joined in a private circle before that show last year. The first show in 17 years of Penn V-Day to include trans people, although they do include the trans monologue performed by cis people. That was nice. It was interesting to be sitting up there while 5 people talked about what it was like to be trans, and then seeing me sitting on the stage, and they were going, "Why? What?" I walked into Salt Lake City as no less than 20 people shouted slurs as they drove or passed by. I spoke to Flint natives and indigenous folk from Standing Rock on a summer day in Michigan, wondering why I was the one speaking when they had stories to tell. I stood in the botanical gardens in Gainesville, Florida, as a trans girl also dealing with chemo hugged me for 5 minutes after I told her I'd helped her complete the fundraising she'd needed for bottom surgery. A trans girl in Scotland who told me that my weekly show of bullshit trans jokes helped her get through the roughest year of her life. The professor who took me to dinner to learn more about the community and to be a better ally. My internet son who can't be himself because his birth parents have put the condition on him that love comes with a price. The abuse survivor who told her story on my show to help others avoid the same situation. A non-binary person meeting me in Seattle at a show for other podcasters I'd once thought out of my league, but had since friended me. They fell in love with me and moved to St. Paul to keep an eye on me when my husband needed a break from dealing with my overwhelmingly wifely ass. My girlfriend with similarly bright hair who tells me I'm beautiful even when I don't feel like it, and who also blushed like hell at knowing she was included in this. And of course the man who made me his wife because he fell in love with the person and the gender didn't matter. When I wrote my piece a year ago for this show, it was filled with my history and all the vitriol I'd built up and finally declaring to the world who I really was. This year I face the fear of the unknown as the date for the installation of my shiny new science vagina finally approaches. Wondering what feeling correct in entirety, my body matching my spirit, will bring to life when everything else has matched up so well. But I also feel guilt, which transfers to rage, because for all the luck I received in my transition and journey, for the platforms I've been given, the space in people's headphones, the words on hundreds of pages, why did it take screaming in a hate pastor's face, going to a school that defends our right to exist, podcasting for our community, and speaking out at a convention for me to be treated the exact same way that every trans person who comes out should be? I may be able to write, but I'm not special. When it comes to my name and my identity, I'm not special at all. Every name I read every year on the Trans Day of Remembrance is one more name that didn't have to be there. Whether it's because comedians still defend using us as punchlines, because ignorant people think they know better, because well-intentioned people want an ally cookie, or because people think we deserve to die for existing. I should not be treated better just because I'm the first trans person that you ever met in person and could therefore put a face on the issue. How about treating us fairly because we're fucking people and not because of all the work I've done, meaning I've somehow earned it in your eyes? When trans people tell you who they are, believe them. When someone tells you their pronouns, believe them. When someone tells you their name, believe them, even if you're against the singular they. I just used it several times there. You didn't notice until I pointed it out. We don't have to get surgery to be who we are. We don't have to go on hormones to be who we are. We don't have to pass by your standards to be who we are. I speak now because so many can't, and in November we'll have to read another list of names because others will never have the chance to. They'll never have the chance to help us reduce the list, help us, respect us, believe us, all of us, not just me, because I wouldn't have the chance to speak here without so many others fighting and dying in that process for our right to not be murdered, raped, discriminated against, exiled, hated, told we're mentally ill, dead-named, misgendered, harassed, assaulted, beaten up, bullied, mocked, punchlined, or otherwise harmed for no other reason than existing. Help us reduce that list. Help us keep them safe. Don't wait until we're standing here to defend us to your shitty friends. Correct them. Stand up for us. We are here. We exist. We are valid. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me the space to say those things. There are those in the religious community who would say I'm going to hell, whether it's for being gay or trans or autistic or an atheist or, I don't know, wearing flannel. However, there are also those in the atheist community who would call me slurs or tell me that I'm mentally ill or playing identity politics. It's a rough time right now. It's a constant state of hypervigilance for so many, and sometimes either having that or responding to it leads us to a place where we're just waiting to jump on that first person who indicates whatever it is that's pissing us off currently. We've all done it. We're all guilty of it. What can we do about it, though? I'll get to that. I'm going to tell you about some of my interactions over the past few years, some of the ones I described in that opening monologue. Let's start with one of my favorite stories, the one of how I came out publicly. I got the name Marissa at age 18. I lived in a very conservative area of Pennsylvania and attended a super elitist school. Interesting combination that would never come into play later in my life. I was given the name Marissa by a friend who decided to dress me up and pretend to be her girlfriend to get a guy to leave her alone, because that's how you handle these things before #MeToo. They called me Marissa, and it stuck. For years, I used the descriptor drag queen because that was the only word I had for what I was or what I thought I was. Most people thought I was gay, including my parents. They're right, just not in the way they thought. I spent my whole life being pushed into a box, both by religious people and by older gay people who felt I just needed to come out of the closet and accept who I was already. Not all of those same people would embrace me when I did come out of the closet, just not in the way they expected. I started to embrace the word transgender in 2014 when I was at Penn, and finally starting to truly express myself. It's hard to put into words the elation one feels when that starts to strip away, when those layers of societal expectations and overcompensation for them, they start to just peel away because you're not so busy trying to convince yourself that you're someone you're not. Unfortunately, that process was cut short because, as I described, I was sexually assaulted twice in 1 week. It numbed me and made me feel like I needed to hide, and I did so for almost 2 years. Those years I spent miserable, hiding, and convinced the world would never accept me for who I truly was, and to be myself would mean harm or worse. Then, Pulse happened. June 12th of 2016, someone walked into a gay club in Orlando, Florida, and murdered 49 people. The second name on that list was a woman with the last name McCool. A year later, I would stand at that very spot for over an hour just being there. My father once described a similar aura visiting the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. Pulse was mine. Apart from the obvious, the biggest reason it was such a place of importance for me is because the Pulse massacre put me in the position of having to confront one of my worst fears. What would have happened to me if I had been there? I don't mean whether or not I would have gotten shot. What I mean is, how would the people in my life have remembered me? At that point in time, about 98% of them would have remembered the wrong name, the wrong gender, the wrong identity. I put on a face for almost everyone else in the world and existed as the real me within the confines of my husband's protective arms and few elsewhere. We did a podcast covering the event, and I read an anonymous letter to conclude that part of the show. That anonymous letter was a post I wrote when I first heard the news that night, but most people didn't know that at the time. I'm going to share it with you now, though. It was written June 14, 2016 on my Facebook page and read, quote-unquote, anonymously on Inciting Incident, episode 35. If you don't already have this experience, I want you to imagine that from a young age, or maybe even recently, that you began to realize that you were different from most of the people around you. Maybe you forced yourself to pretend you liked certain things to fit in. Maybe you wore certain things that didn't reflect who you were, but you thought it was the only option. Maybe you convinced yourself you were crazy because the other people associating with you seemed to identify so simply, or just talk about the opposite gender in a way that didn't make sense to you, but it was all you knew. As you grew up or learned more about yourself, the disassociation was only exacerbated. I didn't pass like so many phases older people would use to excuse your behavior rather than validate who you were. The feelings increased. The distance between you and others did as well. And you were left without words to explain what was happening, but just knew something was different. Not wrong, but different. That's important to distinguish. Then one day you realized there were others like you, an entire community waiting to embrace you. There were also other communities that told you were sinful just for existing, that you would burn in hell for eternity because the God who loves everyone made an exception for you, and that you weren't who you thought you were. You could be converted, changed, prayed away. You didn't have the right to be who you felt. And these people felt they could take away your right to identify yourself because they didn't understand or agree with it. As you face these constant attacks, this bullying, online messages, name-calling, physical abuse, verbal abuse, and everything in between, those who remain consistent and back up what they say about loving people and their friends grow closer to you because they don't feel you're holding back anymore. They see the difference. That there's not this resistance or this repression that was obvious before but unable to be articulated. That conflict of greater love against greater hatred seemed to delete the middle and draw you to one of the two extremes. Both were challenging to deal with at times for different reasons, but you couldn't explain what it was. Then one day, however, it happened. You learned that there were words for what you were. Whether you happened upon them online from a friend or, God forbid, through Tumblr, because Tumblr ruins everything, a word speaks to you from the screen, a word that makes you sit up straight and say, yes, that's it. That's who I am. That is what I have been feeling all this time. It doesn't change anything except to give you a name. A label doesn't change what you are or how you feel, but it does give some sense of permanent and concrete identity. No longer do you have to question what it is, or wonder if there's just something wrong with you. It's that. That word right there, in one instant, solidifies confusion and gives you something shorthand to explain who you are. How do some people respond to this? It's so hard to keep up. Why do we need labels? They didn't have these when I was a kid. Are you sure that's what you are? Isn't this just a phase? How do you know if you're really this or not that? You'll get through this when you find the right person. You don't really want to identify as a different gender or no gender at all. You're not asexual, you've just not met the right person. You're not gay, you're just confused. You're not bi, you just can't choose. Pan isn't even a thing, quit making things up. So many special snowflakes who think they're special. Where does it end? How can you not be the gender on your birth certificate? How can you not want to be in love with more than one person? Why don't you want to get married? Why don't you want to have children? Why don't you believe in God? You need to pray. I'll pray for you rather than validate who you are. And when someone attacks who you are, however they do it, you stand up for yourself because you're sick of this bullshit. What's the response then? God, everyone's so PC these days. People are offended by everything. It was just a joke. Relax. It's okay. I'm a feminist, but it's okay. I'm an ally, but I don't mind gay people. Just don't hit on me. It's okay. I can say fag because my friend's brother's cousin is gay, so that makes it okay. I didn't mean tranny like a joke. It's just a word. Get over it. That's why I'm voting for Trump. He says what's on his mind and calls out PC bullshit. Surprisingly, people start feeling victimized because others are claiming their own identities and not going along with who they pray to. They have rights now and aren't backing down. They become convinced that it's Christians who are the real victims. Their beliefs are being persecuted because they aren't the only ones who have a voice anymore, and that prevents them from expressing their religion somehow. Not to mention, it tears at the fabric of the country and its values because we don't all pray to the same invisible sky daddy. So of course, that means the world will end. A presidential candidate comes along who tells them that they're the true victims and the good people, and if we just got rid of everything that protected ethnic and social minorities, everything would be absolutely awesome again. It's not you, it's them. Then when hate is validated, false persecution complexes are acknowledged, and there are people encouraged to take matters into their own hand. There's violence, there's murder, there's rape, there's bathroom bills that are passed. People refuse to serve others for not agreeing with their lifestyle. And there's a phrase that validates all this bullshit: sincerely held religious beliefs. Whether it's passing bathroom bills, refusing service at a restaurant, calling you a whore for daring to wear that skirt or want access to birth control, or throwing rocks at an interracial couple, it's somehow all okay because of sincerely held religious beliefs. Then it reaches a breaking point, a climax. Someone takes an assault rifle and murders 50 people. Maybe you knew some of them, maybe you didn't, but being a part of that community that embraced you, it hits you harder than any other attack would have. People like you were the ones singled out, and unlike other attacks where it was against a solitary person or disassociated through bigoted legislature, this was a frontal attack, not just on the people there, but everyone who was a part of that community. Then you reflect on other tragic events, ones like this that have taken place, where we all became one people for a few hours at least, and hope this might be a time that people can drop their bigoted, hateful shit and come together to support a community in pain. For a good portion of the people, this did happen, and it's sad it has to be a political statement to be a decent fucking human being under these or any other circumstances. But what do others do? Make jokes. Laugh at PC libtards who won't know which group to defend, tell them they deserved it, celebrate the murder of their own citizens, somehow consider them all pedophiles and say they deserve to be murdered. The people who consider the Westboro Baptist Church a hate group pretty much say the same things the Westboro Baptist Church does and don't see the correlation because, well, they don't picket funerals. And of course, there will always be the conspiracy theorists because somehow everything that happens is a secret act by the government they also claim is useless and can't do anything right. Oh, and so many of those people screamed, #AllLivesMatter, when others were claiming their right to be equal citizens. Funny how they don't seem to matter to them in this instance. For once, someone was claiming their right to exist and be equal, and it wasn't including them, so they had to force themselves into it. Don't forget about me. I'm also important. My life matters too. Not acknowledging the fact that the only did not exist in front of the slogan. For once, it wasn't about them, and they couldn't handle that. And I say if you're going to consider yourself pro-life and yet celebrate the murder of your own people, you need a new word. If you call yourself a patriot and yet claim that a mass murder of your own country people was a benevolent act of God, you're a selective patriot at best. If you call yourself an ally but remain silent when the community is attacked, you just not yelling fag at people or comparing trans people to monkeys isn't enough. You need to speak up. And if you're going to say that God loves everyone and all lives matter, at least be honest about your asterisk. God loves everyone, asterisk, except for all the people I don't agree with politically, socially, religiously, sexually, or philosophically. And all lives matter, asterisk, except for all the ethnic and social minorities, non-binary people, non-cis people, non-straight people, non-Christian people, non-whatever I am people. Because when I say all lives matter, what I really mean is my life matters, and I don't want you to forget about me. Complacency is dangerous, and many felt the fight for the community was over when marriage equality became the law of the land. Many, including myself, remarked that the fight shifted to attacking trans people because they lost the fight on gay rights, so they needed another minority to attack. What happened in Orlando was an attack on who many of us are. It was an attack on the community that openly embraced us and let us know we weren't alone in this world just because we weren't like most of the people around us. If you can't understand that, I don't know how to make it more clear and concise to you. Our very way of life was assaulted and 50 people lost their lives. Why? Because some guy saw two guys kissing and decided that everyone had to die. So let's make that perfectly clear. Two people of presumably the same gender kissed equals mass murder. And yet it's our community who is tearing the entire country apart. That makes sense. Do not be silent. Do not let this pass. Do not allow people to make jokes at the expense of this. Do not celebrate the murder or validate the hatred and ignorance of others. And please, to those who are scared, do not hide who you are because this might happen to you. Not being true to yourself is scarier than any risk you face once you've opened up. As an atheist, all I can believe in is the one life I know I have, and I don't want to see anyone waste theirs because they're afraid that some nutcase might get trigger happy for someone daring to be who they are. This is unacceptable, and this needs to be addressed for what it is: a hate crime, a mass murder, an attack on our ways of life, and proof that the fight was not over when marriage equality passed. The fight for equality has gained a few victories, but the election of someone like Donald Trump only demonstrates how easily time and rights can be rolled back. If you don't believe me, just remember that the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, and it only took 9 years to completely wipe out all the progress made in at least half the country. Rights were gained and then taken away. Few people lived long enough to see when those rights would be restored. We can't let that happen again. If God loves everyone and all lives matter, start acting like it. Excuse me. Thank you. Sorry about that. Accidentally put down one too many pieces of paper. Whoops. There we go. 1 month later, I went to the doctor and I was on hormones. July 13th, 2016 was the day I started my medical transition, but not the day I came out. That was October 15th. One of the highlights of Penn's campus is Locust Walk. If you ever go to Philadelphia, I highly recommend it. It's several brick roads that go through the campus in between the Fisher Fine Arts Library, the Van Pelt Library, the Bent Button, and Hogwarts, or whatever the hell else is there. I was the artsy kid. I went to like 4 places. We stayed far away from the Wharton School of Engineering. The joke is, how do you know a student is an engineering student at Penn? Because you never see them. But the problem with that area is it's also considered a public area. And despite Penn being a private Ivy League university, this led it to be a place where hate pastors would protest. What do I mean by hate pastors? Well, I described, before I met this one, some of those people. The best way I can describe it is people who act exactly like the Westboro Baptist Church, but also condemn them to pretend they're not as bad. I walked by these people several times because I was still in that state of belief that if you counter-protested, that gave them the attention they wanted, and ignoring them meant they'd leave you alone. That same belief led many people to believe that the best ideas would win out, and we wouldn't elect a certain someone president. The same certain someone who attended the very university I did and bragged about it. that certain someone that led Penn students to feel like they were in a 2-year perpetual journalism interview about this certain alum, which also invited hate pastors like this one to feel safe, to tell us things like the suicide problem we had at our school, which was awful, 13 students in 4 years. That's what he was there to protest, to tell us that those kids killed themselves because we accepted gay people. Something clicked in my head this time. He wasn't just standing there with a bullhorn. He was following kids around and screaming slurs at them, calling girls whores for having exposed shoulders. Philadelphia, 2 years ago. Shoulders make you go to hell because you're a whore. That's the shit being yelled at our university. And of course, anybody who had a hijab or anything like that was a terrorist. Anybody who was a Jew, everything, every possible thing you can imagine. Sorry. Just the worst of televangelists come to life. I started distracting him by being a smartass, not because I thought I could do better or have an actual argument, but because I knew I had had enough experience in this world to not take him seriously and let him ruin my day. These were 17, 18-year-old kids he was yelling at. I was 31 at the time, and I just had that moment of nothing this guy says matters. He's yelling stuff that is so inane that most of the televangelists he worships would laugh at him. He said he had no sin. I'm pretty sure that Jesus guy had a saying about a rock and throwing it. I'm no Bible scholar. I think that was part of it. And then, of course, that he went to the real college to study the only book that mattered, but had to highlight passages in it to quote it so he could remember them. And I asked him, what if the highlighter was gay? That highlighter touched his Bible. Maybe he's going to hell. They don't know how to respond to shit like that. They're ready for the, you're evil, you're the Westboro Baptist Church. They're not ready for someone just sitting there going, what if the highlighter's gay?
What if Jesus is gay?
Yeah. Have you seen those abs? Come on.
No marriage.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I didn't really think I could have an actual argument, and I didn't intend to. But I spent an hour and a half just pointing at every little thing. He couldn't name a single commandment. He quoted the Golden Rule when asked to name one commandment. Once again, I'm no Bible expert, but I'm pretty sure atheists can rattle off a few of them. Then he asked if anyone had the courage to be tested upon the Bible to see if they were going to hell on a scale of 1 to 10. Pick me, please! It was just like an interview. Do you swear on the Bible? Yeah, of course. What the hell do I care? And it started with questions like, do you drink? Yes. Oh, you're a drunkard. Have you ever had premarital sex? I'm married. Well, did you? Yes. Oh, you're a whoremonger. This is all on video, by the way. Not intentional at all. And then, 5 minutes of me answering questions and pointing out his bullshit. He told me, on a scale of 1 to 10, you're a 9. You're not like all those people. At least you're honest about the fact you're going to tell. And I said, you want me to make it a 10? I'm transgender. Fuck you. Walked away. I called him Pastor Carl because it's just so easy to say, fuck you, Pastor Carl. But he's easy. He's the outlier, the extreme, the worst in the sense that he was willing to insult children to their faces. Just the same as condemning a Roy Moore or Harvey Weinstein is the most obvious and indefensible. But much like recent allegations, talking about comedians or any of the other ones that aren't as obvious as those ones, those are the conversations we need to be having, the discussions and the debates, because they are harder to have. The gray areas are also the most common, and that's what makes it difficult if we believe we can either mindlessly defend someone or throw them out with the bathwater the second they have an opinion we don't like. It's not a productive way to handle these issues. We fall in danger of both fighting against the biases of the religious majority and then also perpetuating our own as if they aren't the same. The atheist community was in an uproar, a state of disbelief, ironically, over people in Alabama continuing to support an alleged child molester running for Senate. The minute the other guy won, oh, he's neoliberal trash. Less than a month after he didn't get elected, hey, you know who we should really start supporting? Jerry fucking Sandusky. That's a great idea. I realize that may not seem like as big of a deal to some of you, but as someone who grew up in the middle of Penn State country, I've seen the worst of this. I saw people marching and rioting over losing the number of total wins their beloved coach had because, covering up a pedophile for 30 years apparently is a big deal. I saw people so quickly forget those allegations and the pain they caused when their football team got good again. And the NCAA did the same thing when they reduced their punishment because why not? People knew about this for decades and did nothing. A DA investigating the crime in 2005 just randomly disappeared. Was never found. Interesting. College football was and is a very religion-like thing in central Pennsylvania. And walking into that stadium with the opposing team's jersey on, because I am from Ohio, that's like crossing an abortion picket line, except there's 100,000 of them. Before 45 was elected, I'd have compared it to a YouTube comment section come to life, but then I saw that much more accurately and compared and, reserved my judgment. So let's review. How can the people of Alabama continue to support an alleged child molester, someone who was removed from the bench twice for ethics violations, has attacked LGBT people for years, and is totally isn't anti-Semitic because he has a Jew lawyer? 1 month later. So how about we start defending Jerry Sandusky? He made a lot of good points. The atheist movement used to only exist in books and conventions, the same way that Star Trek, anime, comic books, and many other formerly niche interests were able to find common ground in a place where they were normally an outcast to some degree. Pre-internet, this was a form of bonding that took place because people of a shared interest came together and formed a community, mostly on one basis. Whether it was Dungeons and Dragons or you don't think there's a God either, that was enough for a while. Once we as the atheist community started getting tired of congratulating each other for being smarter than everyone else for not believing in God, there were splits everywhere. One side, as a general thesis, was keep your social justice / activism / humanism / whatever out of my atheism. The other side was like, hey, we'd like to exist too. Or as critics might call it, PC run amok and identity politics ruining everything. Just because we don't believe in God doesn't mean we don't fall victim to the same activities, biases, and fallacies that religious people do. And just because we don't believe in God doesn't mean we aren't subject to the religious and cultural influences that are ingrained. If you spend 40 years in religion and have learned nothing else about gay people, trans people, drinking, swearing, or anything else fun, you don't suddenly have a greater understanding of those things because you no longer acknowledge the reason you didn't know about them. Years of thoughts and opinions and harmful behaviors were inscribed on your tabula rasa. They don't disappear the minute you decide you got the God question right. As a trans person, I've seen a lot of the, shall we say, woker than thou attitudes shot in my direction. Whether it's blaming us for Trump because we'd like to not get murdered or use the bathroom without being harassed, or because maybe we'd like to not get treated like shit just the same as the religious communities we've left searching for home and acceptance. I know intersectionality, it's sometimes seen as a buzzword, but when we acknowledge that people come from different backgrounds and allow them to tell their stories without correcting them when we don't have that experience, that's really all it is. Acknowledging that some people come to the table with a drastically different experience of an issue than you do. Some of you don't have the same experience as I do, just the same as I didn't have the same experiences as the natives I visited in Flint, Michigan this past summer. Where I approached the workshop I was going to tell my story about being a trans person, they had the experience of having water hose shot at them for saying, hey, could you not poison our water? I will never know what that's like. I was not at Standing Rock. So I'm not going to go tell people what it was like to be at Standing Rock because they were there. Those are the voices you should be listening to. I'm pretty sure me and those natives have conflicting ideas about spirituality. That doesn't mean they don't deserve water. That doesn't mean we can't sit down with them and talk about the issues that are important to us. Our own citizens have not had clean drinking water in that city for over 3 years. But you know what the real problem is? Identity politics. Or, as I'm sure the Michigan governor put it, a bunch of brown and queer people don't have drinking water and they voted for me, so who cares? I was there. I did not approach that city the way I should have, and I felt terrible. Because driving into that area, the roads become awful. if you think some of these roads around here are bad, go drive to central Michigan right now. I'm surprised I had tires, because there's no money there, and nobody's supporting that. Because the governor essentially went, yeah, I know this water's poisoned, fuck them. And you know who didn't have a stake in that? The Standing Rock tribes. They didn't have a stake in Flint, but they went to protect water, because water is life to everyone, not just the people they agree with. That same trip, I heard the story of my friend Renee, who organized the event and was out fighting with the other water protectors for the people in Flint. They told me the story about the first water protector camp they visited, and how when Renee, a non-binary person, told the leader of the camp their pronouns, he laughed and said, yeah, I'm not going to do that. As if our basic identities are up to debate and decided whether or not they're acceptable. As if someone can decide that acknowledging you for who you are is or is not worth the effort. The same is true in a lot of the atheist community. Diversity has been a problem in the atheist community, but insisting everyone is already equal and that we need to shut up and stand together for everything because we think there's no God causes a lot of other problems to be ignored. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but atheist community leaders have not been exempt from #MeToo. And yet the very same people who attack religious people for defending priests or protecting bigoted pastors deify their own community leaders. Hero worship is a hell of a drug. If we take that attitude that we already know anything and are better and smarter than religious people, we not only fall into that very same trap we accuse them of, but we forget that a lot of them think the exact same way, and we condemn them for that. We have a long way to go before religious influence and thought isn't ingrained in our culture, and I wasn't even raised religious. It affects everybody. Just because you don't subscribe to it doesn't mean some of those beliefs have been perpetuated so much that it's just thought of as common thought. The religious influence that I wasn't who I thought I was, or that I must be mentally ill, or any of the other harmful and abusive behaviors I witnessed and received, those still affected me, even though I wasn't religious. I still live in a culture very much influenced by those ideas that come from mainstream religion. Then that mainstream religion gets back into power and slowly does everything they can to strip away as many rights as possible from those of us, especially in the trans community. This week, it was making a safe haven for doctors and medical people who refuse to treat LGBT people or perform abortions. I'm sure glad they both would have been just as bad. In the year that has gone by since that motherfucker was elected, people have been allowed to discriminate against us. They've removed all the protections as much as they possibly could in schools, ones that were put in to make sure that young kids could go to the fucking bathroom. Tried to ban us from the military, and then the judges conceded that, well, we can't ban them from the military, but we can make sure their health care isn't covered. It's not like the Army uses that as a sales pitch. Hey, join the Army, you'll get free health care. But the minute we need something that makes them uncomfortable, then suddenly it's not okay. You can't sell something and then blame people for joining the military for it because of the reasons you sold, and then accuse them of just joining for that reason. Maybe they did, because being a trans person is fucking expensive. Even people I know who are better off than me economically had to start GoFundMes to get their own medical procedures taken care of. The person I look up to most in this world had to do that. She had to fly the whole way to San Francisco from Kentucky just so she could get the surgery. And she did so with her wife, and it's amazing, and they're wonderful people, but they had to source the internet to get basic medical care, just because it's not something that most people can understand or agree with or whatever it is, or understand, or oh, I don't know how you can possibly do that. You know, not like a recent comedian put out a special that's like, some people want the, I'm not even going to go into that guy. But so many people want to defend that. It's just jokes. That's what comedians do. When the joke is that we're trans, it's not fucking funny. When people, especially those of a marginalized community, are considering leaving religion, or at least they're listening to one of us tell them our perspective, how many do you think we're going to win over by treating them just as badly as religion may? How many religious people will defect on being called a regressive leftist cuck for having the nerve to recognize that maybe feminism isn't cancer? Don't even get me started on the atheist anti-feminist rabbit hole. We have to be better than this. And by that, I don't mean sitting down with Nazis and hearing them out. But I do mean maybe not instantly assuming yourself to be smarter and more informed, more reasonable, or more rational than everybody else just because you don't have their experience. People ask me all the time where I think the atheist movement can go from here, and I have to be honest, I don't think there ever was one collective atheist movement. But it may have seemed that way because when all we were willing to do was congratulate ourselves on being right and make religion jokes, not that that can't be fun, when that was all we were doing, when we were just getting together and going, you don't believe in God too? That's awesome. I'm the only person in my town, supposedly, because I don't have the internet. Let's all just hang out and talk about how not God is. We'll never need to talk about anything else. I know some like to play the middle and attack anyone who takes a stance on anything, thereby being the rational one because they can supposedly see both sides. But that's often done by someone not experiencing the debate they claim to be objective about. When one side is saying that black people deserve to not get shot by the cops and the other is marching with tiki torches and chanting blood and soil, there's not a lot of compromise room there. When we speak out about who we say we are, that we deserve to be respected and shouldn't be murdered for existing, and another side wants to ban us from all public space and encourage violence and discrimination, there aren't a lot of ways we can go, oh, let me hear what they have to say. But there are some atheist leaders who think that because they can do that with those arguments, despite not being involved in any way, that we're all the biased ones and we need to stop being so divisive. I'm so glad when someone who has no connection to the community tells me that. When people want to leave religion, we can't also rip apart every part of who they are and instantly label anyone who says the wrong thing once as worthy of being verbally skewered. I speak once again from my experience as a trans person, but if some of us aren't out there being available and making our stories accessible, why would anyone want to hang out or identify with us? Sure, it's easier to write them off as bigots and ignore them, but if we do that because they asked a question that they haven't had the chance to hear the answer to yet, that's not helping anyone. Most of us can tell the difference between wanting to learn and willful malice. We don't talk to the guy who's marching with his hand in the air, but maybe the guy who used the wrong word or is still a little bit influenced by the culture, the only culture that person may have grown up in. We can at least have that conversation without coming off as smug and better than thou. We can be better than that because supposedly we pride ourselves on being better than that and being rational in those situations. But I'm also not saying anyone is obligated to answer those questions. And there are plenty of allies to every movement who are supposedly on your side until they actually get called on something or have to change their behavior in any way. But we also have to look at our own activism in two different ways, aspirational and realistic. I aspire to help create a world for trans people where they don't have to be questioned, don't have to fight discrimination, don't have to make GoFundMes just to survive. But I also know that in reality, a lot of people only started hearing about us when Caitlyn Jenner came out. And everything before that, our representation in media was limited to two things, being punchlines or being serial killers. Whether it's Ace Ventura or Silence of the Lambs or anything that can be filled in with that trope, or any comedy released before 2014, the fact that they're trans is the punchline or the plot twist. It absolutely sucks. But if we're willing to be instantly hostile to anyone who asks a question because they used a word they shouldn't have, we do risk not making a good case to be on our side. The same thing is true in the atheist community. It's easy to make fun of a religious person for believing that Noah's Ark is true, but that doesn't make it good. Don't get me wrong, I will criticize the fuck out of that story and its implausibility. But by being aggressive and hostile to someone just because they were raised where the only people who were around them and that they had access to told them that it was hard fact, I don't think we're helping ourselves by mocking that person along with the idea in that regard. We can criticize the ideas without instantly writing them off and feeling superior to them. Where are all the solutions to these problems? I don't know, and I don't claim to. I can only speculate based on my experience, and I've spent the last year plus traveling all around this country. A lot of people are hurting, and a lot of people are living in very different areas. Salt Lake City is not Seattle. Burlington, Vermont is not Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas might seem like a really liberal area to a lot of people, but then you get up to Burlington, Vermont, where they basically grow weed in the streets, and it's like, okay, that's, that's a little different. The same weekend, well, maybe not the same weekend, the same week, I was in Salt Lake City and Seattle. When I was in Salt Lake City, a supposedly liberal and welcoming city, I walked down the street and I was shouted slurs at no less than 20 times for walking down the street during Pride. I was there for Utah Pride, and I had the nerve to walk around in public. I was shouted a dyke out the car window, which I was okay with because at least I got the gender right, but the rest, you know, I'll award accuracy where it's helpful. But I also don't think that all hope for getting along and being better than this is lost. Religion isn't teaching new ideas. They're running through the same tropes that they have been for thousands of years. But they're losing those major arguments, so they're picking smaller areas. Instead of just throwing everybody under the bus, they go after specific people. And they love to go after us. Because, you know, the book of Job tells all about how those trans people used the bathroom and suddenly there were plagues. I don't know. I've seen it happen. You don't know what us gay people can do. But the point is, when they make specific attacks, that's when a lot of the atheist community goes, well, we can relate to them on that. Like, we don't agree on who the president should be, but those trans people are weird, right? And then we're the divisive ones. We're the hypocrites. We're the people who are a boutique issue. Not that a certain atheist said that right after the election when many of us were looking to people like him to just be not scared. A lot of people were fucking terrified before he was even elected, and there were plenty of, no offense, straight cis white people who were telling us, it'll be okay, just give him a chance. Do you know who wasn't saying that? A lot of marginalized communities, because we've seen how this can happen. But the fact that gay marriage became legal 11 years after it decided an election in the other way means that this country can change pretty damn quickly when people are willing to get out there and not just be bullied by the pulpit or their own community. Even in the hardest of times, I still do all I can to believe that most people are truly good and doing the best they can to make the world a better place. If anything, the election woke them up out of their apathy coma and made them realize that silence can no longer be the answer, and a lack of action does not always come out in their favor. We should all strive to be better. We should all listen more. And we should all take a step back when we immediately get defensive over someone's position or being told that we're being harmful in some way. It sucks when it happens, but it happens to everybody. We need to improve ourselves. And if a person who is in a marginalized community that is not yours tells you that that wasn't okay or don't use that word, take a second. You don't always have to agree with them. I'm not saying that, but give them a second to consider it, at least. It doesn't mean they're right. And it doesn't mean that you're the one who has to change, but immediately getting defensive and writing someone off for having a different opinion isn't doing anyone any good. I was once written off by someone I knew for 20 years because I apparently gave trans women a bad name. The reason was because I saw a horrifically trans hostile meme and said, hey, could you not post that? And because I didn't go along with the myth that all trans people are traps just trying to trick straight men into sleeping with us, I gave trans women a bad name. The proper response to that is, oh, sorry, let's at least talk about why you were hurt by that. Once again, it doesn't mean that every person who calls you out is right, because there are people who are looking for reasons to be hurt or offended. I don't disregard that, but at least consider it. You don't have to be so stuck in your positions that you're unwilling to hear criticism. That is exactly what we accuse religion of doing, and then we do it ourselves because we think we're better than that. If we think we're better than that, we need to act better than that. And that goes for all of us. I started this speech with a piece I wrote, and I'm going to end with one too. Because I am often the first trans person that someone has a chance to see and speak to. I do believe it's a responsibility to put a human face to these ideas and do my best to normalize it. The same thing goes for atheism. You may be the first atheist that someone has met. Maybe not here, but even in different parts of the state. One of the shows I produce, the host is from Brainerd. And that's a lot different than the Twin Cities. They often feel like they're the only one in that community, but they're not. But we have to consider that not everybody has our experience. We're pretty lucky to be where we are, and that's part of the reason I moved here. But I also remember what it was like to be in central Pennsylvania and be afraid to walk down the street. And a lot of people have that same experience every single day, and they should not have to. They shouldn't have to move to one of the 4 places that were protected in discrimination laws. They might have to because a certain someone decided that if a trans person is bleeding to death and the EMT thinks that's weird, they can just let us go now. Because that's what the Hippocratic Oath was meant, I guess. I don't know. But that's unacceptable. And when people come to the atheist leaders, especially in situations like that, they're looking for help, not to be told that, well, of course you think they shouldn't do that. You're a trans person. I can't tell you how many podcasters I've heard who have made that argument or refused to let me maybe argue back because it was 2 straight cis white people arguing about, well, I really don't think trans people should do this. Clearly, we are the ones who should be having this conversation. We're really smart. We're the best atheists. Everybody else is just being divisive. Listen for that. We all have to be better than that, and we all have those moments. Doesn't mean we're not right sometimes, but we all have those moments. It doesn't mean you owe a harmful religious person attention to their horrible argument. Cory Booker said at my commencement speech that I watched over YouTube because I was not going to be there in case someone showed up. After all, I did write a book that started with the words "fuck you" to him. Cory Booker said, you do not have to attend every argument you're invited to, but you can still find common ground with that other person. It does mean that how you treat them, though, may determine their opinion of atheists going forward. Like I said, I was giving trans women a bad name for going, hey, could you not do that? And it doesn't mean that we all have to have that much under consideration, but do understand if you're in a red state or even out of this area, you may be the first atheist someone has met. Just like I may be the first a trans person someone has met, and I can give a human face to that. Remember that they may go back to their community or their church and tell it one way or the other. And it may feel good to laugh at them for believing something that we find inane, but it's not helping us. We still have to exist in this world with them, even if our ideas are the predominant ones. Even if we supposedly win this fight, we still have to exist with those people. And the atheist community has definitely been scarred and its reputation damaged by the people who are willing to do that or defend a child molester. We can't accuse religious people of doing one thing and then do it ourselves just because we don't think we're with an organization that does that. We have all been raised in this society, and this society has a huge religious influence. Don't fall victim to the things that you criticize them for doing. We may not agree, and we are definitely not going to have the same tax code ideas, but they are still people. Except Nazis, fuck them. Before I close out here with my last performance piece, my books are available at marissamacool.com or under Amazon, under my name. I have business cards back there, and they're at the table. They were pretty much all listed, but I'll list them one more time. My books are The PC Lie, How American Voters Decided I Don't Matter, which I've written several times, and I wrote 9 days after the election. My Okay, so I'm a lesbian except for this guy. Chris Kluwe, my friend, former Vikings punter, he wrote the foreword, and I would go straight for that man. I judge all men based on the standards of Chris Kluwe, which is why I'm still a lesbian. One of my favorite people who is also on the show, whose shirt I'm wearing, Eli Bosnick, has an essay in it. Silent Dreams is my book of poetry and essays, which includes the one I'm about to read, as well as the first vagina monologue I wrote, among others. I even put my senior thesis in there, even though it's about German film. I have 2 novels, one of which is called False Start, which is the story of growing up trans in a conservative area and features my bestie Lala, otherwise known as the voice of This Week in Misogyny on the Scathing Atheist, Lucinda Illusions. My other novel, Voice in the Dark, has a lot of atheists that are pretty recognizable in it that contributed to it. From Dan Errol, No Illusions, Karen Garst, Melina Barrett, and others. My most recent book is Passing Cars, the internal monologue of a neurodivergent trans girl, which are essays from me and a variety of other writers, from my cute husband over there, he has one in it, and to former shitlords looking back at important moments in their lives, and analyzing what we were thinking at the time compared to how we think now, and what may have changed and why. The reason I do that is because when I first started podcasting, I heard a bunch of stories about people who saw the podcasting community not as their competition, but as people they could lift up along with them. And I try to do the same thing with writing. I put other people's essays in my books because I want their perspectives on that. I want to know what other people's moments that their lives changed, how they worked through that, whether it was someone getting out of the church or not believing everything they see on YouTube atheism. I think that's relevant. And I like to see how other people interpret those issues. So I try to lift other writers up along with me, and you can read plenty of them if you look in my books. Every one except Silent Dreams has at least 5 other essays. I've had the great privilege to work and write with so many amazing people in this community, and I'm eternally grateful for that. Many of them I've had on my show, The Inciting Incident podcast, who I co-host with Bethany Futrell of Chicago Atheists. We just posted episode number 126 on Friday. And we've seen a few atheists you may have heard of, some of which I've already mentioned. We will be hosting our 150th episode in Chicago. Someone here will be there, Stephanie. On June 23rd, it will be me and Bethany, along with Aiden, Jenica Crail, Stephanie, Mandisa Thomas, and Alex Jules. I also host the Sister Getting Out of Hand podcast, or as I like to call it, Trans Happy Hour. And that's where we just take an hour out of our lives every week to bitch about most of you. But we do it in a fun way. And sometimes if you don't understand a trans issue, it's not enough to talk about it. What we do is every issue that we cover, we put in a skit in the beginning so that we can act it out in a way that may go, oh, now I understand why it's shitty to ask someone what's in their pants the moment after I met them, for instance. And by the way, when I get my science vagina, I will tell everybody the minute I meet them. I'm just saying. I had to wait 32 goddamn years for that thing. I am not going to shut the fuck up about it.
What they did for us kids.
Yeah. I have a science vagina. It's nice. Another show I host is called We Too, Our Stories, which I based on the Me Too movement, and I had people submit anonymous stories about times that they were sexually harassed and assaulted, because when that movement finally got prominence, what I saw was a lot of guys being incredulous. I never knew there were so many people who had to deal with that, and a lot of women going, we've been fucking telling you. So what I did with that was just say, send me your story, no names, and I'll read it. And I had a few of my own, but not everybody who writes to something like that has the platform that I do, and I felt I could use that to at least let other people know they're not alone, and to know let the incredulous people know they're not, this has happened a lot more than anybody thought it has. And I think we're seeing that come out a lot now. I also produce a show called Secular Soup. And like I said, one of the hosts is here from Minnesota, up in Brainerd. Their logo is 2 blueberries and tomato soup. because one lives in Texas and one lives in Brainerd, so they're just a little dot of blue in a sea of red. And I have no idea what their show is about because they pick a topic and then discuss nothing about that topic for an hour. It's great. I love it. If you enjoy other podcasts and haven't heard enough of my bullshit by now, I've been on everything from the Cognitive Dissonance podcast to God-Awful Movies, Scathing Atheist, Atheist Manifesto, more times than I can count. Some radio show that's here, I think it's called Atheists Talk. I don't think anybody knows about that one.
We have 5 listeners, I'm sure.
Wow, that's like 5 more than I should have. I'll be on How to Heretic and Citation Needed later. That'll be fun. And just if you want to find the shit I've been on, because there's been a lot, just put my name into the search. Because in addition to the ones I've been on, I have plenty. I make at least probably 4 guest appearances a week. So in the interest of making my experience accessible one more time, I'm going to close this speech with another piece that I wrote called Ode to the Blocked. Everything in it was something horrible that was said to me about who I am, and I refuse to let those ideas determine who I am. But if nothing else, it will give you an idea of the things that we hear from religious people, loved ones, and atheist community leaders, and everything in between. You ain't a girl, you a man. You aren't a pretty girl, you're fucking ugly. Jesus, keep it to yourself. Why would you ever want to talk about this? Why would you ever want to do this? Are you sure you don't have multiple personality disorder? Are you sure you're not just depressed? Are you sure you're not just confused? Are you sure you're not really a drag queen? Are you sure you're really Marissa? Why can't you just be gay? Why can't I use the pronouns I know you by? Why can't I call you the name you were born with? Why aren't you just that name? Why aren't you just that body? Why wouldn't you want to keep it? Why wouldn't you want to have more kids? What will the kids say? What will the parents say? What will other people's parents say? What will other people say? How will you ever get a girlfriend acting like this? Don't you want to be a provider? Don't you want to step up and be a man? Don't you want to be a man? Aren't you a man? You're just you to me. You've always been just you. Your gender doesn't matter. Your genitals don't matter. Nobody cares about your genitals. Gross. Do you still have a dick? Are you thinking about getting surgery? Are those tits real? You're so tall. How will you ever pass? Why can't you just do it in private? Why should we have to change? Why should we have to be different? We don't have to accept you. I'm not transphobic, but I just don't want a dick. I just don't consider you a real woman. I'm straight, sorry. You're really cute and everything, but I just like vaginas. You understand, right? I'm straight, not gay. That's all that matters. It would be a deal breaker. It's confusing. How would I ever explain it to my parents that I'm dating a tranny, faggot, queer, pillow biter, queer, tranny, she-male, ladyboy, dude in a dress, fake woman, not a woman? It's just science. It's just biology. It's just Jesus. It's just reality. It's just my opinion, man. You need to calm down. You need to understand other opinions. You're immature. You're lazy. You're pretentious. You're dramatic. You need to lay off the sensitivity hormones. Where you're always this much of a bitch. You're just too much for me. You need to stop being so defensive. Not everyone is staring at you. Not everyone is afraid of you. Not everyone wants to hurt you. How will you ever get a girlfriend acting like that? Just stop saying no and shut up. Just let me touch you. Fine. Stop being such a bitch. Stop resisting. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Take it, bitch. Stop it. This is what happens when you play hard to get. This is what you get when you dress the way you do. This is what happens when you are who you are. This is what happens when you're transgender. You deserve it. You asked for it. You should expect it. What do you expect? Look where you are. If you've got a penis, use the men's room. If you're trans in the men's room, I'll kick your ass. If my masculinity is so fragile, let me hit you. There's no sexism anymore. Feminism isn't necessary. Feminism is outdated. Feminists hate men. Feminists don't need to include trans women. All women are born with vaginas. This is how you really feel. This is how you really need to act. This is how you need to feel. This is how you need to change. This is how you need to be to make it easier on me. You give a bad name to trans women. You're too radical. You're too angry. You're too bold. You're too confrontational. Nothing's ever going to change their mind. Why even bother? Why not just stealth it? Can't you just hide your breasts? Who do you think you are? Who cares what they think? Just ignore it. They'll go away. Just use the family bathroom. What do you expect? It's their opinion. It's how they were raised. It's how they were taught. It's how they were shown religion. It's not something they can identify with. If you cut it off, won't it hurt? If you get the surgery, you'll still be a man. You'll always be a man. You can't be anything else. You can't change gender. Gender and sex are the same. Gender and sex can't be changed. I have more of a right to your identity than you do. I know better than you. You're just confused. You're just lost. You're just brainwashed. You're just young and stupid. You're just being manipulated by your professors. You're on drugs. You're going to hell. You have no respect for your spouse. How do you think they feel? How do you think I feel? How do you think it's going to take time to adjust? Didn't you just think about how the world would affect me? Are you sure this is right? Are you sure this is you? Are you sure? Hate. So I made it in time for Q&A, if there is any. I'm happy to answer. Thank you for giving me this time.